a country divided.
The most important thing right now is to get that trigger abortion law through the courts.
Rewriting the laws of the land from conception to abortion.
As a Christ follower, my number one issue is life, always has been, always will be.
I trust women to know what's in their own best interest, as opposed to the government and some person in some state capital telling her what's in her best interest.
This is the uncertain state of reproductive rights in America as new battle lines emerge.
If a person is a person from the moment of fertilization, shouldn't they have constitutional protections? What do you think?
Now on Scripps News reports, Unborn. I'm Alex Miller in Montgomery, Alabama. Across the country as we speak, reproductive rules are being rewritten. The most recent flashpoint here in Alabama. The state Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos are people. The case began with the premise that someone should be held liable for harming or maliciously destroying embryos, but it has snowballed from there. The decision has sparked a tidal wave of implications. Now, even Republicans who previously supported restrictions on IVF are distancing themselves from this ruling. So are the leading presidential candidates.
And today I'm calling on the Alabama legislature to act quickly to find an immediate solution to preserve the availability of IVF.
It is absolutely unacceptable to this administration when women are denied the care that they need.
Let's begin with a look at where things stand right now, all sparked by that fateful decision a year and a half ago from the U.S. Supreme Court.
Constitution does not confer a right to abortion!
No right to abortion. The Dobbs decision flipped generations of federal law and opened the door to significant challenges in other areas as decisions moved to individual states.
This is the chaos that has come out of the Dobbs decision.
The latest flashpoint in reproductive rights, in vitro fertilization, or IVF, a human egg fertilized in a lab, then implanted in a uterus. The process accounts for about 2% of all births in America every year, according to the Columbia University Fertility Center.
I think the Dobbs decision clearly puts this issue back at the state level.
It was Alabama's Supreme Court that set fire to the issue of frozen embryos. The Chief Justice leaned heavily on the Bible in his opinion, ruling they are human life. The ruling immediately had a chilling effect on treatments across the state. Providers shut down, worried they could be held liable for discarding embryos, a common practice in the course of treatment.
The reason you can freeze an embryo is because it's not alive.
Now, Republicans who control 3/4 of the state's legislature are considering new laws that would protect IVF providers from prosecution.
We have advanced so far in medicine that we're storing everything from embryos to sperm to eggs for future use, and we hadn't really thought about the consequences of that. I mean, it's time, and it's to figure that out.
Women in Alabama told Scripps News after months of medication and preparation, their treatments are being postponed indefinitely.
I'm just managing my expectations, knowing that it may not happen.
Other battles are ahead. The U.S. Supreme Court is now set to hear 2 major cases, the first on March 26th. It's about the commonly used abortion pill mifepristone, now used in more than half of all abortions. The FDA allows it to be prescribed online and mailed to patients. Plaintiffs argue the FDA didn't study the safety risks closely enough when it was approved more than 20 years ago. But the Biden administration and major drug companies point to a long history of safety, with complication rates lower than Tylenol.
I think it's outrageous what the court has done relative to concluding that they're going to overrule the FDA and whether something's safe or not.
And there's another case on the Supreme Court's docket related to abortion in America. In April, the justices will also consider whether hospitals have an obligation to provide abortions to patients experiencing a medical emergency.
Abortion did win on the ballot. Every single place it was on the ballot.
5 abortion-related measures have appeared on state ballots. Every time, voters backed abortion access, sometimes splitting their vote, voting for Republicans while also voting for abortion access.
Democrats will never stop fighting to protect a woman's right to choose.
According to a New York Times analysis, 21 states now ban or restrict abortion earlier in pregnancy than under Roe v. Wade. Abortion rights opponents are defending those laws in court as supporters push to get the issue on more ballots and pressure Congress to step in.
Roe v. Wade needs to be the law of the land. That's the fix. That's what needs to happen.
The story here is being told every day in communities across the country. Let's explore it in a way that only Scripps can, with our reporters who live and work in these cities and towns. Morgan Trow is from Cleveland, Ohio. Her career has taken her across New York, Washington State, and Michigan. She's now a politics reporter with Scripps News Cleveland. Forrest Saunders covers the Florida State House for Scripps News. He has covered the administration of Governor Ron DeSantis and was an anchor and reporter in Iowa. Rachel Louise Just is with us too. She's a political reporter with Scripps News Phoenix. She has reported for news stations in Michigan and Montana. Morgan, I want to start with you. Abortion, it remains restricted beyond 22 weeks in the state of Ohio, but voters wrote it into the state's constitution just last year. So how can they still deny abortion when it's blatantly now in the Constitution?
Yeah, right now we have about 30 anti-abortion regulations still on the books, and that includes the 6-week abortion ban, which is currently paused by the courts, and a mandatory 24-hour waiting period between a doctor's appointment and then getting the abortion. So right now, the court could prevent those cases from being heard because every single time that there is an abortion restriction, each time there has to be a case that repeals it. So the judges and the justices could decide not to hear the case or decide to rule with the anti-abortion advocates.
So Forrest, they brought up civil liability in the Florida State House. It died in committee. Do you see this as an indicator that there might be some cold feet on this issue after what we're seeing here in Alabama?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much questions and there's so much confusion about what is next for what came out of Alabama and what it might mean across the country and in states like Florida. So absolutely, I think it was a factor. We don't really have the details as to what exactly killed that policy, but having it happen at the same time as these big question marks from Alabama seems to suggest that it might have something to do with it. In fact, in the policy, before they killed the bill, they did try to amend some sort of language in there to exclude in vitro fertilization. Basically, this policy would have covered any embryos in the womb, and they were hoping that that language was enough, but as you mentioned, given the proximity to this decision over in Alabama, it likely played a factor in this bill's demise.
And we're seeing IVF kind of get lumped in with abortion, and Florida is all over the map right now as we're waiting for the state Supreme Court to make their decision. We know that the governor signed in a 6-week abortion ban into law there. He was called out by the former president on the campaign trail about it, said that that was too extreme. Do you think that this has helped or hurt him in the state, his stance on abortion and now on IVF?
Well, that's a great question, and I really think it's a mixed bag, because if you look at his midterm reelection, I mean, the guy had a historic near 20-point margin reelection victory as governor, and he had said at that time that he supported pro-life measures. Now, the 6-week ban obviously wasn't in place yet, but then you have all of this polling that suggests that the majority of Floridians of voting age and above, they do not like the 6-week ban. And there is such a big question mark here in Florida right now as to what our restrictions will look like. The Florida Supreme Court is also weighing whether or not to put abortion protections on the ballot in November. And so what you're seeing is a lot of Republicans sort of step away from this issue as we head into the 2024 election cycle. That's not something that they want to necessarily wade in on until we have more of a definitive answer as to what the laws will look like here in the Sunshine State. Again, we could go to 24 weeks if that abortion ballot initiative gets on the ballot in November. We could go back to 6 weeks. We could go to 6 weeks if the trigger law goes into effect, depending on what the Florida Supreme Court says about the current law, which is 15 weeks. So if you're confused, I get it. And there are a lot of lawmakers here that just don't want to wade in yet.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's all over the map right now. I mean, you're seeing all of these different restrictions, nothing really in effect yet. And you're watching Republicans trying to tiptoe around the abortion and now the IVF issue. Rachel, I want to bring you in on this because in Arizona, they're having similar issues. We're even seeing somebody like a Carrie Lake announcing support for IVF. So do you feel like in the state of Arizona that there's agreement that there should be protections for IVF?
I wouldn't say there's agreement at this point. I think I want to know also with, you mentioned Carrie Lake, she decided to make that announcement that she was supporting access to IVF after a letter was sent out by the NRSC, or a memo that was leaked to the news. And we saw that in that memo, it was encouraged that any Senate candidates would go ahead and support any IVF access because it's so widely supported. I mean, you look at even talking to Republicans, Democrats across the board, this is one of those issues that is not necessarily divided by politics. So I think seeing that this was maybe not going to be a winning issue, we did start to see some of our candidates switch. Carrie Lake is one of those people who did come out after that point and say that. But I do want to note as well that previously in our state, we've seen this as a property issue rather than it being a child issue. So the IVF or that embryo would be seen as a piece of property to that person rather than a child that's living. So our courts aren't totally decided on this, but in the past they haven't necessarily been in the same lane as Alabama has.
All right, we need to get a quick break in here. Let me ask each of you guys to stay with me for just a couple more minutes. Up next, where will the new battle lines be drawn? And how will these debates impact the outcome of the presidential election? I'll ask our special political panel. This is Scripps News Report's Unborn. For all that's reported about how Americans are concerned about issues like guns, crime, and even education, abortion is actually a larger top concern, according to a YouGov Economist poll conducted within the past couple of weeks. Democrats and independents are slightly more likely to rank it as a top issue versus Republicans. Let's bring our panel back in. Forrest, we're really seeing this issue kind of broaden, and we saw that there's a bill now to protect contraception in the state of Florida, but this is something that is already legal. So is this really something in jeopardy? And if it's not in jeopardy, do you see Republicans coming out to support it if it's really not as controversial as Democrats are making it seem?
Yeah, well, Florida Democrats definitely are concerned about it, and that's why they wanted to try and codify it, put it into the Florida Constitution, if at all possible. But obviously, that is a very, very hot topic, and you have a lot of social conservatives in this legislative body, and so they are probably not likely to weigh in on that. They don't want any part of it. And I think that a lot of them feel like Democrats are just trying to make hay out of nothing. At the same time, it is just such a big topic as we move into 2024, and you have so many politicians who are trying to figure out how big abortion is going to play in the 2024 election cycle. So they are doing everything that they can to try and thread the needle, to hold the line, but not go too far. So I think the legislature has decided largely it's not going to do anything major this session. In fact, there was a total abortion ban that was proposed. It didn't even get a committee hearing, despite having GOP supermajorities in both of the legislative chambers.
You know, it's interesting because after Dobbs was the Dobbs ruling and after Roe was overturned, so many conservatives told me that the IVF decision wasn't something that was going to happen. And then as, you know, the months and now a year and a half has dragged on, we are starting to see those things. So Democrats asking or concern about contraception kind of still falls in line with a lot of what Republicans were kind of trying to tamp down over the last couple of years, but we really are starting to see some of those concerns come to light. And Rachel, your state is one where the state Supreme Court justices are going to weigh in. Again, we heard arguments back in December of this 1864 law that they are trying to make a decision on. When they had those arguments back in December, did they seem like they were going to support this law?
They kind of kept it close to their chest, I would say. It's unclear at this point exactly which direction they'll be going. I will note, if we're going to speculate here, which I know we don't always like to do in news, but one thing I'll note about this is that all of the justices on Arizona's Supreme Court at this point were appointed by Republicans, and that was, of course, with the help of a bipartisan committee. But at this point, I would say it's a more conservative-leaning court, so we don't know exactly which way they would go, but it's possible they could take it in that direction. But I would say as well, we could end up with a tie. That's something that's unique in this case because we had one of our justices step aside for this case. We have just 6 people on this. So if that happens, I think that's going to open up a whole nother can of worms.
Oh my goodness, it absolutely would. And abortion could potentially be on the ballot too in Arizona this fall. It's one of the many states that are trying to get this measure on the books. And we have seen other states, both red and blue, have success for abortion rights advocates in this. Morgan, your state passed a ballot measure supporting abortion rights and trying to get into the Constitution. Yet the state of Ohio voted to support President Trump 2 times. They have a Republican governor. What does that say about the state of party politics there when it comes to issues like abortion?
I think it shows that Ohio is still a more red-leaning state, but that Ohioans want access to reproductive health care. What really angered voters was the 6-week abortion ban, which had no exceptions for rape or incest, and it would have been put back into effect had the constitutional amendment not passed in November. And even Governor Mike DeWine before the election said, well, maybe we should go back on this. It's really unpopular. Maybe we should compromise, which really angered Democrats and Republicans alike, in addition to really the moderate Republicans who stood out against this.
And thanks to Morgan Trow, Forrest Saunders, and Rachel Louise Just for sharing their on-the-ground reporting. Ahead, a special political panel joins us. Almost as soon as the Alabama State Supreme Court issued its ruling saying frozen embryos used for IVF are humans, a flood of Republicans came out to oppose it. In political terms, this is not a winning issue for Republicans. Just 1 in 10 Americans say they think IVF is, quote, morally wrong. And more broadly, whenever the issue of abortion has come onto the ballot at a state level, it has been supporters of abortion rights that have been victorious. Jennifer Horn is the former chair of the New Hampshire GOP. She hosts the podcast, Is It Just Me or Have We All Lost Our Minds? And Megan Hayes is a former special assistant and director of message planning for President Joe Biden. Megan, I want to start with you. We've already seen the Republican campaign arm come out and urge their candidates to support IVF. So do you think it's something that undecided voters will be able to put aside and support the GOP off if their leaders, including the former president, are supporting IVF?
So I actually, that's a great question. I'm not sure that will happen. I think that voters are overwhelmingly where the Democrats stand in this. They are constantly fighting for their freedoms and fighting to have access to their freedoms. And I just don't think that the voters are going to stand with the GOP in November when that comes, because they're seeing what they're doing to their freedoms.
Jennifer, abortion rights advocates have been winning on this. Every ballot measure that has come forward has gone in the favor of abortion rights advocates. That is a win for Democrats. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that this is one of those issues that crosses party lines, obviously. And when it comes to the Republican voters, as opposed to Republican Party leaders or the Republican Party platform, there's a measurable amount of support for the right to access abortions legally and safely in this country. And if you look at, you just mentioned the efforts that have already been successful in some states. One of those was a Republican state with a Republican governor. So I think that we're going to see a continued level of support for some of these efforts amongst Republican voters as we go forward. And I would also say, I think that support is going to have a significant impact on the outcome of the presidential election come November.
And the data shows that it's not even necessarily a partisan issue, abortion. The data shows that Republicans do support the right to access abortion, at least Republican voters, at least in some capacity. And yet we're seeing legislators come out with a much more hardline approach these days. Why do you think that they have such a different approach, really, than what the polls are reflecting?
Well, because legislators are elected individuals. They are chosen more generally by the base of the party. They're chosen, the folks who turn out for state elections, the folks who turn out for primaries, the folks who vote every election, no matter what. These are base voters. They are more conservative, and in some cases, even I would say just more extreme than the majority of people who identify as a Republican. There are polls that show as anywhere from 20 to 30% of Republican people identify as Republican as being in favor of preserving the right to the access of abortion, and they might have differences about 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 24 weeks, whatever the various states are looking at. But the support for women to be in control of their own medical decisions, to be in control of their own bodies, is very much present amongst many Republican voters.
Well, and it makes it a lot more difficult to get things accomplished when we're seeing the reflection of the voters not necessarily in the halls of Congress, and yet Democrats are trying to codify Roe. There isn't support, at least widely, amongst Republicans on this, Megan, and I'm wondering if Democrats are considering a similar avenue with IVF. Do they feel the need to, explain in legislative terms IVF and frozen embryos not being considered humans under law?
Look, I think that the president and the vice president are going to do everything that they can to aggressively fight to protect the freedoms and protect your reproductive health care, whether that's with IVF or with abortion. I'm not sure that codifying IVF treatments or how you legislate that and how you legislatively describe that to folks is really what's the next step here. But I do know that the president and the vice president are fighting for access to medical care and to make sure that women can make their own choices, and they are, they want Congress to codify Roe. That is very, tenement to what they believe in. And the president's already said that he'd veto a national abortion ban.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to Jennifer, Megan, and to all of our guests for joining this important discussion. And thanks to you for watching. Our focus has been on the facts, the reality of what's happening on the ground in communities all across this country. For now, reporting from Montgomery, Alabama, I'm Alex Miller.